This is a moment of honor. Now, I'd like to call upon, firstly, to begin with, Mr. Anjum Rajabali, one of our most prominent screenwriting teachers, screenwriters in our business. Thank you, sir. Please take your chair. I'm going to now call upon Mr. Zaman Habib, General Secretary, Screenwriter Association of India. We have the new, improved, lean version of Siddharth Roy Kapur joining us. For those of you who don't recognize him, he's not Aditya Roy Kapur, he's Siddharth Roy Kapur, who's just lost a lot of weight and he's far more fitter, leaner. And we have our priceless Juhi Chaturvedi in the house. Thank you, Juhi, for being a part of this, taking the pain to come. Oh, of course, we have this maverick of a writer called Saiwyn Quadras. Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Where is Saiwyn? Saiwyn, you're going to have a backflip entry or something. And also joining us with this dynamic Mr. Vipul Akarwal, co-founder and CEO, Mugafi. Thank you, Vipul. Please be seated. Please be seated. Once you all are comfortable and give us a thumbs up, I would like you all to take a moment to notice that this room is full. It's going to get more and more packed. Just so that you all know, this is a heavyweight session for all of us. No pressure, please be. But over to you, Anjum sir. Big round of applause.
Thank you very much, Viraf, always. Do I start when this counter starts, or?
Sir, it's all yours.
There, it's begun. Okay. Thank you very much. Truly, it's very gratifying, very heartening to see so many people here. And even though all of you may or may not be writers or aspiring writers, but that you have such a keen interest in this field, to be present here and give 1 hour of your lives to this is indeed very reassuring. Before we start, let's acknowledge that something quite significant is happening in America. The Writers Guild of America, as some of you may be aware, which is the leading, one of the leading writers' guilds internationally, has declared a strike as of the night of Tuesday, Indian Standard Time. Siddharth, you must be aware of all the details of why they are on strike. It's very simple. The WGA has a 2-year minimum basic contract, minimum basic agreement, which they call, which they negotiate with the Association of Producers, that's the AMPTP, which is the Association of Motion Pictures and Television Producers Association, to essentially ensure that writers' rights are protected, that the clauses are standardized so that writers don't have to feel vulnerable during the individual negotiations. Because as we are all aware, and that is the nature of business, that the bargaining power between an individual writer and a corporation is obviously unequal, because those are the producers, they come in with a certain degree of financial backing, and as a result of which the writers tend to feel alone and vulnerable. So the union takes it upon itself that to rectify this imbalance, we need to put our joint efforts together, what is called collective bargaining, so that there are certain standardized clauses, certain basic minimum pay, and some guarantees which are there in the contract, so that the writers are protected simply because then they are free to do their work without the anxiety of having lost their rights or having been vulnerable in this equation. Generally, it's been working well, except that in 2007, November, negotiations fell apart. This is because the internet had just come in, and certain new rights had opened up, new platforms for exploitation. And the studios and the networks were a little anxious that who knows how this business will go, so they resisted having an upgradation. So they went on strike, and it was a huge strike with a lot of support. But that got resolved eventually because they came back to the table, the AMPTP, and they managed to come to an understanding. Well, it's broken down again. And while we are not here to discuss the WGA strike per se, But there are certain issues which writers face internationally, globally, including in India, where we are aware that the task is perhaps more uphill than theirs because we are not as organized with a history of collective bargaining as WGA has. And Siddharth and I are going to have a little bit of a discussion as this sort of panel proceeds to get a sense of the concerns also from the other side. Okay, yes, we need to be sensitive to each other's issues. Only then can there be a successful negotiation. So we do intend to take that up. But to begin with, did he give an elaborate enough introduction? No, he didn't. This is Zaman Habib. He is the General Secretary of the Indian Guild, which is the Screenwriters Association. He's also a writer, and he also is a producer. And he's a member of, in fact, the Guild. So I've especially insisted that he come here so that he represents a particular point of view. Siddharth, of course, has been a long-standing and one of the most respected producers and the leader of the Guild for a long time, in fact, over 2 or 3 terms, right? 3 terms, 4 terms, 5 terms, 6 terms. He's been the president of the 6 terms. You can imagine how well-loved he is by both sides. And he has been extremely responsive and receptive to our concerns. So it's important that we have an empathetic voice here from the other side. Juhi needs no introduction at all, except the fact that the work that she's produced has also always tended to break new ground so that other writers realize that the bandwidth of creative choices has opened up as a result of the work that she does. Saiwyn, the maverick, as he said, he's also a member of the Guild and activist and one of our most sought after writers and a very difficult person to deal with. Okay? Yeah. There's Vipul, who's also pioneered a certain initiative about which we will learn as we go along, but it's to do with screenwriting. He's like a participant observer. He's observed the industry and now he's also part of it in a certain way, so he will have some views. Okay, let's kick it off. Okay. Zaman, I'm going to start with you. The title is The Challenge of Being a Screenwriter today. I'm talking particularly in today's context. On the one hand, the screenwriting field is also regarded as a sunrise field because so many opportunities are opening up. There's a constant demand for writers and people are delighted. Young writers are really delighted because there are web series being made. Television in any case was very prolific. Films continue. I mean, India is one of those countries which still produces about 12, 13, 1400 films a year in spite of COVID and in spite of Hollywood virtually not assigning, on not having any film assignments going, which is what the WGA was telling us. But here we are still going strong. We still are a movie-going public. We like that collective experience of going together to watch. So everything is opening up. Then why are we saying that there is a challenge? I mean, why is it, what is, according to you, what are, according to you, the problems that writers are facing today, such that they're still complaining? It's still a challenging task being a screenwriter in India.
Thank you. First, we are not acknowledged. Second, we are not paid the way we should be paid. There is credit issue because we work hard and then suddenly the producer or the director or others, they mention that they have worked together, they have collaborated something, and they take away our credit. So there has to be certain definition of work, like we have been working on embassy and how much work should be considered to be a writer and all. So this is the main thing. We need to define, we need to sit together and discuss things, how to go about it, because we are, most of the time, like in TV, I'm talking about TV, we develop something, then some other writer take over, and it is not yours. That happens every now and then. Film maybe the same thing happens most of the time. So also there is, the writers are not valued. this is the most important thing. It is credit and money part is something else that is to be fought for, but we are not valued. Like, for example, if a film is made, the first person, the content creator is the writer. Is he called for the press conference? Is he called for any promotion? No. He is just taken on board to write and he's dumped. He or she, whosoever. He is not there. So he is not acknowledged. Whereas if a writer who has created the content, like say, for example, if I'm a writer, I have written TV shows and I have written more than 11,000 episodes so far. That means 300 hours content. If I go by business, one episode, I am sure, and being a producer, I know you are making 1 or 2 lakhs per episode as a producer. So I have created or generated, or I am the reason of that money. I have made more than 300 crore for the producers only. Forget the broadcaster. So I have created a space for creating almost 1,000 crore for broadcasters and all. Where I'm valued? No. I'm not acknowledged. You acknowledge the actors, the producers, other people, the directors, but you are not acknowledging the writer. Why? Like Juhi or Saiwyn, anyone, you have written 10, 12 films. If on average, 100 crore, means you have created 1,000 crore. You are not valued in terms of money. If we talk about commerce, the actors gives you opening, the director makes you 200 crore film. Yes, we are creator of those 100 crore of film. So why? Like, I never call myself a writer. I call myself, I am into the business of writing. I'm a businessman, and I want it to be taken as a business thing.
Thank you. That was pretty straightforward. So, Siddharth, the first point that Zaman is bringing up is acknowledgement. Now, as far as the work is concerned, it's the credit which guarantees your acknowledgement, because you go down in history, and credit is important for show business because on the basis of that, the career is made. So it's not just that you received your money, take your money, write, and you please go. I will decide where the credit comes or not. But it's important for him because he's writing for both, for money as well as for credit. So that's something that we have discussed earlier, but I'm going to ask you to please state your views here. Is that a lot of, not lot, but most contracts which are coming to us from studios, platforms, production houses, it carries a clause which we find very unkind and which really agitates our soul, which says that you're being engaged as a screenplay writer, let's say, this is the money that you'll be given, etc., etc. And then there is an overriding clause which effectively overrules everything there, and it says that the final credit will be on the discretion of the producer. And this bugs the hell out of us. Now, I'm sure that there is a certain reasoning involved in there, and I'd like to hear from Siddharth that point of view. Firstly, do you feel that this is unfair to the writer who's putting in his effort? You're saying that I'm engaging you for that task, which he's completing, okay? And yet, he has no guarantee that he will receive credit on his work, and which authorship, I imagine, is an inalienable right. Even the law guarantees that. So how do we deal with that? What is your view on that?
So to start with, I just want to say that that was a very impassioned speech by Zaman on what he feels the position of a writer is, and I don't disagree. I think the fact is that writers have traditionally not been acknowledged as much as they should be, and there's no doubt about it, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that thought process, because the fact is that any piece of work comes from the mind of a writer, and then, of course, everyone else comes together. There are 300, 400 people who come together to be able to create what first sort of emanated in his or her mind and to be able to convey that onto the screen. So traditionally, because of the fact that has always been a backroom exercise, it's been behind the scenes, it's been something where people have not been on the forefront, the power equation has always been tilted. I do agree that that acknowledgement and that credit has often been something that a writer has had to fight for, rather than it just be part of what they're given. I do believe, and I'm not sure whether you all agree, that things have changed over the last, say, 10 years or so, where there is much more acknowledgement of the writer's contribution to a piece of work. Audiences are much more aware of who writers are, rather than just believing that this has come from this director and it's not come from someone else who came into the picture before that. I think, Anjum, the specific question you've asked me about that clause, right? And that clause can absolutely be something that a writer can find very hurtful. What I believe the intent of whoever's drafted it, and lawyers can tend to be quite non-emotional about these things, is that if there are multiple people involved in the writing of a film, because which does tend to happen, sometimes a story can come from someone else comes in for screenplay, someone else might come in for the additional screenplay, someone else can come in for dialogues. Very often what happens, therefore, is that credit is something that the producer has got to arbitrate at the end of the process, right? Now that the SW has put in a mechanism where you are taking the onus of arbitrating that, I think that's actually a positive for the producer, because honestly, I don't think any producer intends not to give credit to someone, right? It might happen because they're just not a little callous about not thinking it through. I don't believe that there's a malified intent to say, I will not give credit to a writer. They have put that in to protect themselves from the idea that if there are 4 or 5 writers involved in the process, one writer might believe, no, actually I should be credited for screenplay, but the other writer might believe, no, you came in much later, you should be credited for additional screenplay. Another dialogue writer might believe that I didn't just do dialogues, I also changed part of the screenplay of the film, and therefore I should. So the intention to say it will be, decided at the discretion of the producer is that I don't want any issues later amongst 5 writers who I've hired on the film. Now that the SW has said that you are happy to arbitrate that, I think that takes the weight off the producer. And I can speak for our production house, we're quite happy to leave that decision to the SWA, because we want the ability to be able to bring multiple writers if we so require onto a project. But we are happy to give them the credit that they deserve. So that, I think, was the intention of the clause.
There. You know why he's on this panel? Okay, because he's able to see the other point of view. But I have to say to all of you that Mr. Roy Kapur is an exception here. And I'm aware of this because we have been negotiating with other production houses also. And I want to say something which is a little sharp here. See, on the one hand, we do say that it's a film industry. It's the entertainment industry. And yet, an industry by itself means that there should be certain fair business practices where all the people who contribute to the business ought to be given their due and their proper, appropriate remuneration, acknowledgement, etc., so that it works as a team. Yet, there is a hangover of the historical attitude that producers have, which is feudal. That, bhaiya, ye hamara hai, hum तय कर रहे हैं, हम आपको काम दे रहे हैं. So it becomes the whole, in the battle of needs, while the producer needs the writer to give him the script, because if there is no script, there is no business. As Spielberg himself once famously said that if the writer doesn't do her job, the rest of us don't have a job. There is no job, there is no business, there's no producer, there's nobody. And yet, in spite of the producer needing the writer's script, the equation becomes as if that you need me, because I'm giving you the money, as if I'm seeking employment. So आपको इस नौकरी की ज़रूरत है, मैं आपको नौकरी दे रहा हूँ. And that's the feudal attitude, which is why a lot of the contracts in earlier times, which we had to fight, I had to personally also fight in my case, were very feudal. कि तुम्हारा जो है वो सब कुछ मेरा है. One producer told me, he said, you don't understand, Anjum. And he was a big producer. And massive fight I had after that. He said, it's not just the script of yours which I'm buying. I'm buying your mind. I'm buying all your thoughts. Whatever you think about while you're on this contract is mine. And I mean, for a moment I was apoplectic, dumbfounded. I said, are you nuts? What are you talking about? This is a professional transaction taking place. You need my script, I need your money, and I need you to make the goddamn film. It's an equitable equation taking place. It won't seep into his mind. And he's an established producer who made literally dozens of films. अब ये mindset, ये feudal mindset का hangover आज तक है. और एक और आपको छोटी सी बात कहूँगा. And Siddharth may not necessarily be very happy with this word. There's an ego problem. Can you believe it? That the producer, and I was told this by a lawyer representing a big producer, that it is the ego of the producer which will not allow that discretion to be taken out of their hands. I am the position. I pay the money. And once you heard also in a meeting that we jointly had, that one of the producer's senior representatives said, I'm sorry, we pay the money, we decide what the credit is. This is not how it works. And this is exactly the raw nerve. This is the problem here. So, there. Now I'm going to, Juhi, jump to Saiwyn for a second and then come back to you. Saiwyn, what Siddharth referred to, that SWA has initiated a mechanism for credit arbitration. See, since we talked about WGA, I'll give you a reference. WGA began their collective negotiations somewhere in 1941. Okay, and somewhere in the 40s, I think it was 43 or 44, they had their first strike. And the issue was not money. The issue was none of the other clauses, it was credit. They realized that the one thing that should be foregrounded in the negotiation is a credit guarantee, because on the basis of that, you get residuals there. You know what are residuals? I mean, when your film is shown on television or on networks or anywhere else, there is a certain percentage which flows back to the writer. And that's how what we have royalties, at least in law, they have residuals. And the fight is about that, because once those residuals begin, they go on eternally almost, and you keep earning your money, you can retire, you can buy an island in the Caribbean, and there's no problem at all if you're a Hollywood writer. Okay. So credit is what they fought for. So the credit arbitration committee that we have instituted, okay, tell me in your negotiations, quite honestly, and obviously you don't have to name names, how receptive have your producers been to taking that discretion away from the producer and saying that you will submit the dispute for credit, as Siddharth mentioned, to SWA, to give the union that legitimate role of arbitrating what will be the credit, and the producer has to abide by that?
That's a tough one. Even given today's negotiations that are going on, it's a fight. First of all, for the normal clauses, it's a fight. But to then add that SWA will be involved in the arbitration of credit if there's an issue arising, it's also because, like you said, the WGA has gone on a strike because they're a strong force. SWA still has to get to that point, and we are getting there, but we are not gotten there yet, especially in the eyes of most of the other producers that we are speaking with. Like my earlier contacts even told me that it's a deal breaker if you say that you want to go to your union if there is any issue that will arise later. And it's hard.
Just repeat that. The producers are in their contract.
In the contract mentioned that I can't go to my union.
You cannot go to the union. It's a constitutional right, by the way, that you have the right to seek redress from your representative, which is the union. That's like saying that, okay, your uncle is helping you, you cannot go to your uncle. Okay, if you have a dispute, you have to ensure that you go to the arbitrator that we select. And it's an arduous process. If you appoint a professional arbitrator, it's very expensive. And it's a very arduous process. And we don't want to go there. Okay. So as a result of which, we have a purely transparent system that we have set into motion, which Siddharth and I bear witness. In a contract that I signed with Siddharth, this is what I had mentioned. He spoke on the phone with me and he clarified, so this is the process. I said, yeah, this will be the process of arbitrating if there is a credit dispute, because there was a co-writer coming onto picture. He said, okay, done, no problem at all. He's an exception. But he saw the merit in that. He said, it's off my head then, because then the writer cannot blame me. तुम्हारे union ने बोला है, उस हिसाब से बढ़िया credit मिला है, which is the way to do it. So what is the problem?
The problem is, I feel that the most producers think that getting an SWA will complicate matters, And or they would rather have the writer have the fear that if I have to address any issue that will crop up, I will have to go straight to the court of law, which I might not have the necessary funds or the time or mainly money, of course, to go and take a lawyer and go to the court, because the producers will have better lawyers, or they will make the case go on for longer. So it in a way becomes a deterrent for the writer to even think of fighting for any of those issues and say, you know what, let it be, I'll work on my next film.
So the decision remains that with the producer in any case, because
Yeah, so
by default.
that is the battle going on even now. So probably all of us sitting here as writers on stage are probably, more accomplished in the business, so it's easier for us to negotiate that aspect. But of course, there are a lot many writers who kind of go out there and tell that I'd rather just safeguard my credit and the money and forget the other clauses, because that's where I'm coming from, and hopefully it'll change in the future.
Yeah, but you're not even safeguarding credit. Juhi, I'm going to come to you here. See, according to me, the primary concern, anxiety that the producer has is if you empower SWA, which is the representative, then what happens is that is one step towards collective bargaining. You're saying that we acknowledge that SWA can argue on the behalf of the writer, which is how it should be. That's why unions are made. I mean, that's the raison d'etre of a union, that they help you to seek redress. But by doing so, then they will have collective bargaining. What happens is that suddenly the bargaining power begins to acquire a kind of, or rather lesser inequality. Okay? And this is their problem. So the empowerment of writers seems to be bugging them, according to me. Okay? Now, I'm putting it very straight, and I don't know, Siddharth may disagree with my phraseology, but effectively, this is how we see it. I mean, we are screenwriters, we are entitled to do some dramatic expression, okay? So just let's go along with that, but according to me, this is the essential truth. I'm going to come to you. This empowerment of writers, why does it cause so much anxiety?
Even, see, it is so deep down, the whole idea of the writer getting recognized. Sadly, what happens, even if the producer acknowledges you, even if your name comes on the screen as a screenwriter, because he has done the right thing, he has given your name out there. And I'll be very honest, I haven't faced that ever in my career so far, that my name has not been acknowledged or given the credit. But even if the producer has given, everybody around makes you feel so indebted to it. All the journalists, all the critiques, they make it seem as if, oh my God, you have got the credit for your work. And you almost feel indebted to the producer and the director that, oh my God, they've done such a big thing by putting my name there. And automatically, even if from their side the producer has, given you your due, but you will always feel indebted to them just because my name came there. How is it fair? Now, one name over there on the screen is not going to change this. Visibility is important. Talking about the writers is important. Every time there's a conversation, the actors need to say the story or the screenplay or whatever was written by so-and-so. They need to have those kind of panels where the producer, the director of the film, the writer of the film, everybody comes together as a team. It cannot be me versus you at all. It's not producer versus writer. It should not be, because if filmmaking is about a team, we are all one side. We cannot be on the other side of the table. I strongly believe that. Now, if that is true, then why is this tug of war going on? Why am I feeling guilty that my name came there? I feel very comfortable, and okay, poster does not have my name. It's okay. They made me write the dialogues, but they did not mention anywhere that I was associated with the films. I'm okay with it, because that seems to be my rightful place. But everybody around, and that's true, all the journalists actually, they make you feel damn guilty that you were given the credit.
Yeah. You know, one of the other things which I need to mention.
So my problem is
sorry.
reverse, actually.
That
That I have got the credit,
No,
but
I
I'm
was
so
taking off
indebted
from there.
that it almost feels that, shit, it was better if they had not given me the credit.
I was taking off from there, in fact, Juhi, that, you know, for so long have writers been treated as people to whom the producer is doing a favor by offering him work. Truly. I mean, in this whole battle of needs, it's become like that you need me, producer feels. I don't need you. Okay, so the writer is made wait outside. I mean, he's busy running after the producer. Then uske baad free mein kaam karo, likho, ye likho. Phir bhai contract kar do, sir, paisa nahi mila. It becomes this way. That unfortunately, too many writers have internalized that position, what Juhi is referring to in a rather humorous way, that they actually feel indebted. कि भैया काम दे दिया. They don't even look at the contracts, which SWA has been hammering away through their mails, that do not sign a contract unless you show the draft contract to the SWA lawyer. We have a lawyer offering free service. Okay, full-time lawyer, qualified IP lawyer, free service there is, so that you understand, okay, these are the pitfalls and this is how I need to go back and negotiate. A lot of them don't bring it there. Then later on, of course, when they don't get the credit, when the last installment of the money doesn't come through, then they're busy screaming away. Because they've internalized this. That excitement which they get, which actually what Zaman was trying to counter, that hang on, treat yourself as a businessman then. That you have this product. You need this product? Sorry, this is what you will pay me for that. Because you have the talent, you have the gift. They can't write. So that becomes a bit of an issue. Vipul, quickly, I'm going to ask you, I'm afraid, because I need to move on to the next topic, a concise answer. You've been an observer also. Do you feel the representation is actually one of the constructive options, one of the answers to this situation? We're talking right now about the union, and I'm asking you about whether agents are the answer.
So, multiple things. I think the people sitting here and being the part of industry have at least know about the things we are talking about, have understand the rights, but there are a lot of new writers who are coming and they are not aware of the industry. They don't talk to a lot of people out there. So they don't even understand that what kind of laws exist for them, So for them, if I'll just get a chance to give my script to someone, whether I'll get some money or not, I know the people who just even get 5,000, 10,000, they're very happy that I've been able to at least show my script outside. Yeah, so I've been able to show my script outside. That's also what's mattered to them. So they don't even worry about the rights that they own, the money that they're going to get later or not. So, and for them, it's very tough to hire a lawyer, and go through those processes where they want to get into a debate when they are not even getting an opportunity. So getting a right association, getting a right representation is something which is very, very much mandatory at this point of time. So we have actors agency, we have agencies for everyone out there, who manage the actors, who goes through the legal rights for them, but there's no one who goes through the legal rights for writer. So I think that's something which is, in this era, it's mandatory for the people to come out, start representing those writers, and fight on their behalf or get them the rights that they are due, so that after a few years, they don't have the fear that I'll get the credit or not, like that doesn't either play as a guilt or not as even the opportunity lost.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you for that observation. Siddharth, I'm going to jump to you now, okay, from the other side. Yes, we've been complaining, and rightly so. We have problems, challenges, credit, money, etc. You tell me, what are the problems that you are facing with screenwriters today? Where does as a producer and as a writer-centric producer, as a script-centric producer that you are, which I know that, I mean, most producers will not confirm your script, particularly if it's an expensive film, which is there in the script, until a star is attached, until certain commercial props are in place. So then they know, okay, acha bhaiya, iska paisa milega. Then they will confirm you and say, acha bhaiya, now I can sign a contract with you. Mr. Roy Kapur didn't do that, at least I know this from experience. It was a very expensive script that I offered. There was nothing, nobody knew which star, if at all, was going to come in. He was happy to sign a contract on a very dignified fee, which we negotiated, and he agreed, and we went ahead, correct? Right. So now I'm asking you, since you are so script-centric, I'm sure you face a dissatisfaction with writers, and I want a very frank answer here, because I want it aired. What are your problems?
Yeah,
I guess being the only producer representative on this panel, it is only fair to my fraternity that I do air some of the grievances that I've heard producers, talk about.
And that you have faced also.
And that I faced. And I think what I want to definitely say is that there are always going to be reasons behind it as well. So everything that I say will always have a justification for why probably writers are going through a situation which compels them to behave in a certain manner, etc. But I think the few things that I would cite are, at least the key things that I would cite are, number one, the quality of the submissions that producers receive, and because the demand and supply in this industry, and not just in India, but around the world, is always going to be skewed. There are always going to be many more scripts or stories that are available to be made than can actually get made, right? And therefore, that skew is always going to be there. It's a 1 in 100, if that chance, that something that you are working on is actually going to move to the next stage. Which I think, therefore, makes the job of the development team at the producer's end that much more difficult, because they have to sift through that much more material to be able to find something they want to take to the next level. What does tend to happen is that writers, probably because of various reasons, number one, the institutional training not being in place to the extent that it needs to be. Number two, maybe the eagerness to get something out there really fast in order to be able to throw a lot of things at the wall and hope that something sticks. The rigor in the process is low. On an average, is what I'm talking about. And therefore, you might get into a situation where there is so much material being churned that the inspiration for the team having to read this gets to a level where they're going to skim through material at the end of it, because they're really eager to go to the next one, because this one is just not something. So I think the rigor involved in actually having a submission meet a certain standard is very important. I completely acknowledge the financial difficulty that comes with, especially if something is on spec, etc., etc. So I'm not for a minute saying that it's easy to say, but I'm just giving you the other side of the spectrum where there's a table piled with scripts, and if they're all at a certain level which is not worthy of being taken to another level, the incentive to read through all of them is very low, right? And therefore what tends to happen is it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle where people you know and have worked with before are going to be the people that you keep working with again, because you at least know that that's things at a certain quality, and newer writers will not get the opportunity to be able to break through. So that, I think, would be one. Two is, and while I've acknowledged that there can be callousness on the side of the producer towards writers, there is a very, very high sensitivity amongst writers when it comes to something that, let's face it, is a commercial art form. We've not chosen to get into painting. It's not sculpture. It's not, it is a commercial art form at the end of the day. There are certain business decisions that have to be taken at certain points of time, whether that means bringing another writer in, whether that means discontinuing and having to bring a whole new team in. It happens to production teams as well. I think writers need to understand that finally they've signed up to be in a business, right? They haven't signed up to write a book on their own. They haven't signed up to, they're choosing to be in something that is going to involve crores of money invested in it. Therefore, you need to have a certain level of dispassion when it comes to these decisions being taken, and accept that it's part of the business. What happens is that because of sometimes frivolous claims being made, frivolous lawsuits being filed, etc., producers then tend to get very guarded about accepting submissions, number one, and number two, about the demeanor and the sort of person that they're working with when it comes to a writer. Is this someone who's going to overreact? Is this someone who, if I tell them, listen, it's not working, we need to bring someone else in, we love the story, but the screenplays that you don't want to work with going forward because they're going to kick up a fuss beyond what you're prepared to deal with? Those are things that producers are thinking about all the time. So I think it's very important for writers also to reflect and say, it's a commercial art form, I've chosen to sign up for it. Bad things happen sometimes. I might not agree with the decision, but finally, the film needs to get made. And therefore, I think those are things that people need to keep in mind when it comes to the interfacing with a studio or with a producer.
So some writers overreact, and that's why producers are a little wary of them.
I think when it comes to, you guys know better, but most people say there's 7 ideas that keep getting rejigged and changed, and there's 7 stories out there that keep getting reconfigured, right? Now, Therefore,
Yeah,
it's very
36 actually.
36.
Yeah, 36
Done.
original
See,
dramatic
I knew you knew better.
situations. That is George Polty's survey. Yeah, okay.
But I think the thing is that because there might be a germ of an idea that might be something that you're working on that another writer believes that's my idea and I've registered it with the SWA and I had sent a script of the same sort earlier and now that idea is being stolen. Therefore, what's happened is now producers have tended to get much more cautious about accepting what we call unsolicited submissions,
material,
right?
yeah,
Because for a writer, the minute you've mailed that means now the producer's read it and he's going to, copy it.
Copy it,
But the thing is that that might not even be something that you've read through and you've accepted the submission without getting the writer to sign a submission form or a release form, and then you're stuck. And there are crores of money riding on that. Yeah. So there's a certain amount of trepidation in the production fraternity about the kind of writers that you want to work with and those who understand and are savvy enough to know the way the business works.
That I understand. But you also said that if sometimes you critique the work and the writer is perhaps going to overreact, and there are some writers like that. So is that why I am out of work? I mean, nobody's offering me work because I have the reputation of overreacting.
You're the moderator of this session. Anything that I say is going to be
turned around. Yeah, see this, once again, let me point this out. It is true, I completely valid that there is a genuine anxiety that they face because sometimes a writer who has submitted a work to a producer, the producer rejects it saying, कि नहीं ये जम नहीं रहा है मुझे, fair enough. Then at some stage the producer makes a film and the trailer comes out. And in the trailer there are some similarities that this writer sees. So immediately they assume that my work has been taken. Either they go to court to ask for us blocking the release, okay, or they approach SWA. So there are a lot of these claims are there which you need to sift through and be able to demonstrate to the writer that bhai wo tera nahi hai. But for this, we also need the production house to trust SWA to arbitrate on this because we have a dispute settlement committee, which is, and I mean this completely objectively, absolutely fair. Okay, we are not here to side with our members no matter what. That's not the job of the committee. Exactly. We've even banned certain writers because they are the ones who actually were accused of plagiarizing. Even, I'll give you an example of, openly, of Gully Boy. Okay, so there was the trailer came out and one of our members actually wrote to SWA with a whole chart of comparisons. Okay, this looks like mine, but please assure me that it is not by doing a comparison. And because that person had submitted at some stage a script, similar script to Excel. So note was sent to Excel saying, Bhaiya, please submit the script of Gully Boy. Gully Boy is 1 week away from release. And you know how nervous producers can get कि अगर ये बाहर आ गया तो भैया problem हो जाएगा. मतलब script अगर बाहर आ गई तो. So the producer called me, okay, Ritesh, and he said, this is what has come. They're accusing me of plagiarism. I said, I doubt that they are. Scanned the letter and sent it to me. And it was a very plain letter that this is what has come, so please show your script so we can work it out. I said, trust SWA and send it. He said, 1 week away from release. I said, trust it and send it. Take my word for it. He sent it. It came for comparison, etc. And it wasn't. It clearly wasn't. That writer's script as well as the Gully Boy script was read, and we said, no, it is not. So the writer was assured, and he went away. Now, seldom, actually, do we find a producer cooperating like this. Because once again, they feel, why should I leave it to SW? And this, I'm saying we're making a constructive move in credit arbitration, in these kind of infringement disputes. It's a constructive, we're supporting the truth here. And yet, there seems to be a certain nervousness, and not just there's an allergy. I mean, there is a dismissive way in which the union gets treated, and that's our grouse, which is why Saiwyn mentioned that sometimes there's a clause saying, if in case of a dispute, you will not approach your union. Arey, I have a right to do so. You don't cooperate if you don't want, but I have a right to go there. So ye thoda sa ek aa jata hai. But there is an anxiety, as a result of which their release forms get very stringent. And once again, I'm sorry, I mean, this looks like I'm constantly, commending Siddharth, but I brought it to his notice. I said, this is an unfair clause here. There was clause number 3. He said, okay, let me just engage the lawyer. So the lawyer was engaged, we discussed, and they changed that around because the proposal that SWA made, they incorporated that. They said, yeah, this is fair. You remember that. Okay. And we're very happy with that release form. कि भैया अगर आप हमारा काम आपके काम में आया है, then we have every right to take action against that. But provided that has happened, if it is your original work produced by the company, generated by the company, that's fine. We don't have any issue with that at all. So this balance is important, and that is what we are trying right now. And now I come to the other point. This whole move towards standardization of clauses, which is very important to protect the vulnerability of writers, right? Zaman, if you can take that mic, please, if you don't mind. Yeah. How far are we in history, do you feel, where actually collective bargaining will become a reality, which means specifically that these standardized clauses that we are talking about, that we as a union, on behalf of the entire membership, you know how large is the membership of SWA? Do you want to know? Yeah. The total membership, which includes produced writers, those writers who are under contract but their work hasn't come out, which are what we call associate members, and there are the fellow members who are aspiring writers. It's 56,000 people, and this is only SWA I'm talking about. There are 6 unions across India. 56,000 writers are members of ours. Okay. So this, how far do you feel that this is, now the time has come, where
Yes.
this is a viable proposition?
Yes, yes, the time has come. We are ready, as you know. We are ready with our draft. We met Siddharth and team last year. And we just need to sit across, साथ में बैठे हम बात करें. एक चीज़ का सिर्फ वो प्रॉब्लम क्या हो रही है? The problem is कि whenever we go to meet producers, first meeting या जो भी होनी चाहिए, there should be no lawyers. Because एक आपस में जब हम बात करते हैं ना, वो जैसे ही लीगल लेवल पे बात होने लगती है, it doesn't work that way. So first, listen to us. हम क्या कह रहे हैं, क्या points हैं हमारे. If there is any legal point that needs to be discussed, then, but वो हमारी पिछली मीटिंग भी जो हुई उसमें वो ज़्यादा लीगल लेवल पे चला गया और जिसकी वजह से वो मीटिंग कहीं की नहीं रही. So first we need to sit across the table because like we are not just matlab, against the producers. We should not be against the producers because we have to work together. हम एक चीज़ लिख रहे हैं, आपको वो बनाना है. So that should be the thing. So we need to sit across. उसमें पता नहीं क्यों the producers are not willing to come across the table. I don't understand why. Maybe their legal team are not or warning them कि नहीं नहीं इसमें नहीं जाना है हम. We will represent. Otherwise कई बार ऐसा हुआ last 2-3 years में तो हमने इतने writers अभी writers भी थोड़े वैसे हो गए कि they don't know where to raise the issue. कई बार ऐसा होता है जो आप बता रहे हैं ना कि अरे मेरी कहानी चुरा ली, अरे वो डॉक्टर है, अरे डॉक्टर है तो क्या हुआ यार, मेरी कहानी का भी डॉक्टर है. हाँ, उसमें भी वही डायलॉग बोला कि मतलब सॉरी मैं बचा नहीं सका. तो ये सब तो कॉमन चीजें हैं. We have to understand the difference between story and expression. The idea and expression का एक फर्क है, वो राइटर को भी नहीं मालूम है. तो वो हम लोग अपने राइटर्स को भी हम ट्रेन कर रहे हैं. वी आर लाइक डूइंग सेशंस फॉर देम कि भाई समझो कि किस चीज़ पे हमें बात करनी है, क्या चीज़ पे बात करनी है. बट यस, वी आर रेडी विद आवर ड्राफ्ट ऑफ मिनिमम बेसिक एग्रीमेंट. वी शुड सिट अक्रॉस. सिर्फ वो प्रोड्यूसर्स को सामने आने की बात है, लेकिन द मोमेंट फर्स्ट मीटिंग में ही अगर लीगल टीम आ जाती है, देन it won't go anywhere.
Zaman, it also is their discretion to bring it. And I'm, by the way, I'm perfectly okay with legal team. I'm happy to
नहीं,
deal
but
with
पहले
lawyers.
एक बार सुन तो लो,
Okay,
उसके
okay.
बाद.
So that very quickly, because I have to cover one more topic before we end. Do you think that it would be a constructive move, frankly speaking?
I think it's actually not a bad idea not to have the lawyers present in the first meeting, number one. I think it's a good idea. What he's saying makes sense. But what I would then do, what I would recommend, since I'm not the president of the guild anymore and this is something that you'd be taking up with them, what I'd recommend is start with building some trust, right? I think that's the most important thing.
Tell me how.
Have meetings in smaller groups, exchange ideas and exchange concerns on both sides, and come up with something that is a moderate plan to start with. Certain bare minimum things which are the lowest hanging fruit that are obvious concerns on both sides that you can actually address. Get some success there on both sides.
And then build on that.
And then build on that. Because as soon as both parties see that there is willingness to do something and both sides are things are getting addressed in a very conservative way, not too ambitious, 2 or 3 smaller things, you'll have to build from there further, right? I mean, I read this interesting, again, I'm borrowing from what someone in the WGA himself said, which is that this strike is like the house is on fire and 2 members of the family have decided to have a fist fight in the middle of the living room, right? The industry is not going through a good time. And I know some people will say it's never a good time, but we are particularly in the throes of a very, very difficult time right now, right? You've got studios streamlining the amount of things that they're making, the number of things they're making, and the budgets that they're making them in. You've got appetites shrinking. There was a certain gold rush that happened in the content market, say 5 to 7 years ago. That's dried up. We're all feeling it. The theatrical market is in the doldrums. I don't think we should put ourselves in a position where we come to where the US has come to with parties striking work. There's no sense. Because when you're in the throes of despair and you're in a perfect storm and you're deciding rather than to take the ship forward, you're fighting over the wheel, that really is not a situation I think producers want to be in or writers want to be in. So I think it's important for us all to understand that this is a situation within the industry. Let's figure out a common minimum program, a bare minimum that we can do to start with, and build from there.
True. But I have to remind you, you had an earlier president who always used to open a meeting by saying, industry is bleeding. Industry, you remember that? And we felt that you're always complaining. Every time we want to discuss, okay, fair.
And then drive off in a Mercedes after that.
Absolutely. Next day, go and purchase a pretty Jaguar. And we're bleeding. So that means the negotiation should be aborted.
I genuinely feel at this point of time,
You
and I'm
think
sure
so?
you're all feeling it, I'm sure everyone in this room who deals with studios or deals with platforms or deals with producers is understanding that it is a strange time right now. The theatrical market is going through a phase, and it's all cyclical, so it will change. But we have to acknowledge that there is pain at this point.
Yeah, but
and
Siddharth,
margins are under pressure, and profits are under pressure. And so I would rather avoid things getting to standoffs between writers and producers and directors and producers and writers and directors, and find ways to work together, because...
So would we, Siddharth, so would we, except that in India, I mean, I'm not referring to right now, the WGA demand in the new one, which came to some 469 million is what would add to the burden, as the AMPTP said, whereas they're offering 86 that way. So that is, okay, a separate matter. Right now, it's out of the framework for us. But here, when we talk about minimum fees for writers, which even you will agree that no matter what the so-called condition, that we're talking about new writers, that there should be a dignified thing. I'm not referring to Juhi. Okay, Juhi gets what she asks for. Saiwyn gets more than what he asks for because of the way in which he negotiates, okay? But the minimum, the new writers, it's their vulnerability. I mean, we are aggressive enough to argue and get what we want, more or less, but it's that. Okay, I'm going to come to one last thing, and I'm starting with you, Juhi. In terms of our creative effort, there has been a growing concern of self-censorship, okay? Because there have been some episodes of how objections are raised by certain social groups, political groups, etc., and which then go to court, and in some far-off place, one case is instituted, and as a result of which, the producer suffers, the whole series or the film suffers. So there has been a certain degree of trepidation. Maybe that's a phase that we are going through. It has happened earlier also. I remember My Name is Khan, that happened, and even with Fana, it happened as far as Gujarat was concerned, etc. This is now percolating down the line from what I hear when I speak with writers, that not only are producers who are sensitive to this, they're apprehensive, no, don't write this because it might create a problem, but anticipating that, writers have begun to self-censor. And when a society makes an artist self-censor, that is an extremely serious situation, because what you are affecting is the very basis of your culture, which is freedom of expression of the artist. Has that begun to happen, you feel? Do you have trepidation when you're writing that I should be careful?
I'll tell you what, everything boils down to the intent. As a writer, you know what is your intent when you're writing what you're writing. Just to write something explosive, you can create controversies because you have the words, you have the writing tools, all the, the freedom that we say, but no freedom is ever absolute. And I think awareness is very important. I might want to say something in a particular fashion, but I need to be very aware of the times we are living in. And self-censorship is not wrong. And only when I say self-censorship, it does not mean that because I'm scared, so I will not do something. I need to be very clear of my intent, why I'm writing what I'm writing. And that automatically will, it'll be read in a certain way. Your director, your producer, everybody needs to be on the same page, because it's a very expensive medium, right? What you put out there in the society, it does have an impact. And if the impact is that, it can bring about some certain kind of a change, if it can start a certain kind of conversation, right? It's a positive intent. But if the intent is just the opposite, that there'll be, a lot of tweets and people will, talk about it, I'm just saying how do I explain that? There is a fine line in writing something which has value for the society, but maybe it's all right to be little mindful, because your producer, your director is putting huge faith on your written work. And if we as writers don't take the responsibility of what we are writing, I think it'll be a wasted effort.
That I understand, Juhi, and that's generally always been the case.
Like, for example, names. Something as small as this. Can I name my negative character Gopal? It can be that tricky these days.
That's what I mean. This is actually restrictive. This
Correct.
why you're saying this example
it
that
is,
you're saying.
Yeah. It is restrictive.
Juhi,
but
I need to
yeah.
just come back on this little bit before I move on to Saiwyn. See, social responsibility, that you provoke to offend.
Yeah, you provoke to offend.
Hang on, that I understand. That's always been there, and that should be there. I mean, you can't sort of do that.
And there's nothing wrong in provoking
provocation
at all.
Yeah, but I'm saying even there, freedom of expression with that social responsibility is a very nuanced thing. Okay, what happens now is that even like you're saying, you use the word Gopal for a negative character, and that if it's going to become a problem, then I don't know where this stops. So that may not be the intention at all.
Yeah.
Like names, etc. Siddharth also must be aware that we are all getting a little extra and too mindful, which is tending to restrict the creative bandwidth with which writers are writing. Let me just jump to Saiwyn. Saiwyn, you have a view here? Do you feel that there is a particular hypersensitivity as a result of which there is a very vigilant self-censorship which is going on? Because that is what I'm finding.
I can speak from my personal experience in the kind of films that I write or the work that I do. None of my films have had expletives or characters that, in a way. But these days, what we are seeing all around us, anything can be made a noise of. Whether you wanted, whether you thought of it at all or no.
Regardless of whether there was an intent or not, is what, that's what I was saying.
Even if it's a completely clean script, but your character was, negative character's name Gopal. Because in these countries, Muslims don't exist, right? They're only Hindus, so the hero also is a Hindu and the villain also will be a Hindu. But suddenly, just for that case, they might say that someone will land up and say, no, can't be Gopal. You didn't intend to do anything. But now the point is, you write, you do your job. Now there are various levels that happen. like be it the producers, be it the legal team that is going through the script and then telling you that these are the things that now I didn't self-censor while writing it, but the demand of the legal team who's going through the script before it goes into production or whatever, the demand comes through, it's my responsibility to be cognizant of that and make those changes.
I don't know whether you'd call it responsibility, but it's your obligation. Because
It's
yes,
not-
you are
obviously,
supposed
it
to.
depends.
To make
It-
that
it
thing
really
happen,
depends
if
because-
to make that thing happen, and because there's so many other things
No, make
involved,
that thing happen, of
others will
course.
write a novel.
By contract, you're bound to do that. But I'm saying that therefore, this becomes an atmosphere of anxiety for the writer.
See,
That's what I'm talking. How you negotiate with it is yes, because eventually, yes. I mean, and the producer is far more vulnerable than you are.
But
Which
personally
also
speaking, I
Siddharth
haven't come to that anxious
No,
point.
no, you may not have come
Yeah,
to it.
now, if it generalizing, then of course it'll be a conversation where we'll have 10 writers and we'll probably ask them. But I'm speaking from my personal experience that
No, no,
I
I'm saying
don't
we've
shy
seen
away from
cases,
saying
no?
the things that I want to say.
You've seen instances.
Yeah, of
Hence,
course.
that's what I'm referring
Of course.
to.
If everyone is being aware or it's being a conversation between writers. And
Siddharth, is this a concern? Frankly? Put it in your own words.
You know, we are living in a society that is polarized, that is sensitive. Social media has made everyone much more, sort of trigger happy in terms of having to give a response to everything. So we're living in a pretty sensitive time, right? Now, in an environment like that, again, I keep going back to this. This is a commercial art form. We've chosen to put crores of, rupees behind a piece of work. Obviously, you don't want to fall into a situation where that work will be waylaid in any way. Jodha Akbar could not be released in Rajasthan, and that was 2009. During Rang De Basanti, we had to show the film to the armed forces.
Air Force, yeah.
And we had to, so in my perception, it's always been there. Social media has exacerbated it now, and people are hypersensitive about it. And therefore, I think it's something that producers always have at the back of their mind when they're backing a piece of content about what is going to be, number one, the commercial viability. Number two, are we pressing on any, are we looking at any hot buttons in there that might provoke some kind of a reaction which might negatively impact the film? And those are things that you keep in mind. And these are often things that don't come from a regulatory authority. They come from a little skirmish that might happen locally, like when we released PK. We were on the phone to police stations all through that, release weekend because of certain scenes there that had created an issue. Now, that was not something that was a government directive. It was not something that was put out by an authority. It was just spontaneous things that were happening in various places that, you don't want your theater owners to be threatened. You don't want, so obviously you're going to think twice then about doing something like that. So I think it's a society we're living in at this point where there is hypersensitivity, things are at a certain pitch, and I attribute a lot of that to social media and people's, sort of ability to be that trigger happy about their views. So you absolutely have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I know. This polarized times, one second, Juhi, is what I was, in fact, indicating, that because we are living in polarized and hypersensitive times, what happens is also you remember the case of Tandav. Okay, it wasn't intended to be so like that. It was what it was. It was a story which they told with a certain kind of input. And then there were these unregulated people. But what happened, what scared all of us, is that when it went to a regulatory authority like the court, and the court refused to, in fact, even grant anticipatory bail, you're aware of that, what happened. That sent shockwaves that now we can't even turn to the judiciary to support us. And that created this fear whereby I remember conversations with senior executives in platform, in the two major ones, which is Netflix as well as Amazon, that they suddenly withdrew, they cancelled many projects which were confirmed precisely because of this fear. And that is what actually began to, everybody took very seriously. That's what I was referring to there. So there was no intent, etc. With the intent and social responsibility, of course I understand, okay, that one should be mindful of that. Yeah, the aim is not to offend. But even when you are irreverent about it, which is the job of an artist, that becomes taken as offense because it becomes a fantastic political platform for them to suddenly gain prominence. It happened with Arakshan, which was 2011 we are talking about, okay?
Also, sir,
So it has grown,
yeah.
unfortunately, creating this atmosphere of fear.
But I also feel that there is a phase where everybody is extremely sensitive as audience or as, people who want to create these controversies. And it goes down also because there is a lot of fatigue. Like people already know that khamakha ke liye people are creating controversies. There's nothing much to it. So it doesn't go, it starts somewhere. The effort is there to create some kind of a big controversy, but it dies down. Because it has, I think somewhere the, again, people can see through. I strongly believe.
I hope so. I mean, right
No,
now
no,
what
they
is...
do.
Yeah, but Juhi, yeah, that's your observation. I completely grant you that, and I mean, the validity of your observation. All I'm saying is that when it starts translating into business policy, that is the problem. It becomes corporate policy.
See, there
Can
would
know
be some
certain...
calculated risks, I'm sure, which producers are taking.
You have to see
And
what their
writers
lawyers, you
also.
should see
Right.
when these big corporations, when they run it past their lawyers, you should see the number of objections. And I've
Yes,
spoken with
yes.
lawyers
Yeah,
also about
absolutely,
this.
yes.
So which means now you're taking a microscope to it. Okay, so the writer's work suddenly is subjected to that. And I guess these are the times, as Siddharth said, and one has to learn to negotiate through them. You can't stop our business. Yeah.
So just on a slightly, since our time's up, we were told, just on a sort of tone of optimism on this front, when we released Heather, which was about, I mean, obviously, we were talking about a controversial state of our country and talking about controversial issues within that. There was a press conference with the head of the Northern Command, and on the release weekend, and journalists asked him, "What did you think about Heather?"
So
and he
which
said,
year was this?
This was 2014.
14, yeah.
So journalists asked him, "What did you think about Heather?" And he said, "What's Heather?" So he said, "A film that's just released about things that happen in Kashmir and the army and this, that, and the other." And he said, "So what?" So they said, "So what do you?" He said, "It's a film." And they said, "But don't you have a reaction?" And he said, "Why are we here? We are guarding our borders in order to let our citizens be able to say what they want to say and have freedom of expression. So
Bingo.
please don't ask me about a film anymore," which I thought was tremendous.
Please bring him here on this panel, yeah, so that we can spread the optimism. Yeah. I wish there were more people like that. So there we are. Time is up. I mean, it's been up actually for a while. So sorry, Viraf, if you're around and the organizers. But truly, thank you very much, all of you. Vipul, Saiwyn, Juhi, Siddharth, Zaman Sahab. Yeah, and
Thank you, Anjum.
yes. Nothing, your sarcasm is always well received. And Siddharth, thanks for making an exception and immediately, actually it's not even an exception, it's a rule. Every time I have called you, you have come. I don't think you've ever refused unless you were traveling. So truly, thank you very much for that. And let's take this conversation further so that we ensure that there is more mutuality in the relationship between producers and writers, because that is what we are seeking. And I'm publicly now requesting Siddharth Roy Kapur to use his credibility, his influence, his profile to ensure that he helps us to attain that level, to be an interface between us and the rest of the producers community. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, all of you.